Hello and welcome to episode 1 of the Stitch Magic Knitting Podcast. My name is Natalie and I'm a maker who mostly knits and sometimes sews, and you can find me on Instagram at natalierxm.creates. So because this is my first ever video, I thought I would give a little bit of an introduction about myself and about my crafting journey and how I got to where I am today. So I'm 24 and I currently live and work in San Francisco, although I grew up on the East Coast of the United States. I've pretty much learned how to knit when I was in first grade. We had an after-school knitting club at my elementary school, and we learned all the basics there, but I never knitted garments until earlier this year. I mostly knit scarves as presents for friends and family. And I think part of the reason why is because I found it really difficult to source patterns that I was actually interested in making when I was younger. I think things are a little different now with Instagram being a great way to find creators and find patterns. And I know Ravelry obviously is a really good resource, but it was a little intimidating for me to navigate back in the day. So I didn't really feel inspired to knit any garments. And only in January of this year did I knit my first sweater. I made a lot of mistakes along the way, but it kind of launched me into the knitting community online because I posted my sweater on Instagram and then I started following other knitters and other creators and realizing how big the knitting community really was online. I think as someone from coming outside of the community into the community, it wasn't super obvious like where to find patterns that I liked even now as opposed to when I was in high school, and only by chance did I find a knitting pattern on Etsy that happened to have an Instagram creator attached to it. And after that I started following accounts and realized that, hey, this community is actually really big. And from there I pretty much went down the rabbit hole, started knitting nonstop, like every day after work when I'm watching TV, or even when I go to the movie theaters or out to the parks to hang out with my friends. And I also love watching knitting podcasts, which is kind of why I felt inspired to film this video today. In addition to knitting, I'd say my primary other craft is sewing. I've been sewing for the last 10 years and I was mostly self-taught, although I did take one class at a local art college when I was in college, and that really helped up the professionalism of my garments. Although I don't really have as much time to sew nowadays because I do live in a smallish apartment and there isn't that much room to do a lot of the things that sewing requires, such as cutting pattern pieces and, well, pretty much just cutting pattern pieces. There isn't as much room to spread out. But I really would like to get back into sewing and do more of that in the coming few months. So that's kind of just an overview of who I am as a crafter, and I think we can just jump into the rest of the video. So if you've ever seen a knitting podcast, I pretty much plan on following the same format that you will usually see. So I'll talk about what I'm wearing, I'll then talk about my finished objects for that time period, the works in progress that I have on my needles, and then any acquisitions I have. I may take some time at the end to also just chat about whatever's on my mind, and you can stick around for that if you are interested. So let's get right into it. I'm wearing the Square Tee by Knitrohi, and this is a test knit that I was a part of back in July. I knit mine in Drops Belle, which is a cotton linen viscose blend, and I knit mine in the shade Zinc. So now I'll talk about my finished objects. In terms of time span, since I don't have a previous episode to refer back to, I figured I would just kind of talk about the things I've been working on over the past few weeks. And then if I film another episode, obviously it'll just be what I worked on between this episode and that episode. But these are all things that I've been working on or finished in the month of September, just the last few weeks, not the whole month. And I have a few test knits as well as a few personal knits. So I'll start with what I finished first in chronological order. The first item I have is this. This is the Lucy Blouse by Knitting Deer. This is a test knit that I was a part of, and the pattern released I think like 1 or 2 weeks ago, so it's already available if you're interested. I knit mine in 3 strands of Drops Kid Silk in the shade Heather, and when I bought the yarn online, which was from Wool Warehouse, it looked a lot more muted, but this is actually quite a vibrant purple, but I'm not really mad at it. I do love purple. I love wearing purple. The design of the blouse is sort of this wrap silhouette, and it comes together at the bottom, so it's closed, although I think in the pattern it says that you can sew together the V where it meets so it doesn't fall open, and I think after blocking that is something I'm gonna need to do because it's a little low cut on me right now and a little too revealing to wear out. But I really love how this turned out. It was my first time working in half fisherman's rib and also my first time knitting any garment that's 3 strands of mohair held together. I know some people can't really stand mohair close to skin, but I personally don't have any problems with it. I can actually tolerate quite a bit of itchiness when it comes to my garments. So I guess I just have tough skin. But yes, the whole thing is in half fisherman's rib, and you can see the back details. There's also like this decorative feature made with increases and decreases. But I personally loved knitting this. I thought the half fisherman's rib was so fun, and this one was knit with the yarn over method. I know there's like 2 common methods for it, and I kind of thought it flew by. So all summer I've been knitting tank tops and short sleeves, so it was a bit of a slog to kind of get back into knitting sleeves again, but overall it's knit on pretty big needles compared to like what they're on the bigger spectrum of what I would work with, so it kind of went by quickly. And because like even when you connect in the round you have those back detailing to work on, it doesn't really get boring and you kind of stay motivated to finish it out. For this one, when we were given the test pattern, it called for I think 8 or 9 balls of yarn, but I had 11 balls of yarn, and thank God I did. I think she increased the suggested yardages in the final pattern, but I was playing a bit of yarn chicken with this one. So I learned how to, for most of the garment, I held 3 balls, just a single strand from each ball together, but towards the end, since I had an uneven number, I learned the technique for pulling 3 strands from a single ball of yarn, which was really helpful. And I wanted to finish this in 10 balls because my 11th ball was from a different dye lot, and I thought you would be able to tell. And honestly, I kind of can tell if I look really closely. I had to dip into the last ball of yarn just for part of the bottom band, and if you look very closely it does look a little darker, but it's not super noticeable. But I was knitting with not that much yarn left and I was a little worried about making it, so the sleeves are a little shorter than she called for in the pattern, although I think she ended up adjusting that in the final version because a lot of people did shorten the sleeves. But I shortened the sleeves by a few inches, and then I also shortened the body by just like 1 repeat of the wrong side and right side, so not that different. But I also shortened the bottom band that's done in 1x1 ribbing from 4 inches to 2.5 inches because I just thought that was more flattering for my body and how I planned on wearing it. So overall though, I really liked knitting this, and I always feel really special when I put it on and wear it, and I think that having something this color in my wardrobe is also really fun. So that was my first finished object for the last few weeks. The next one I have is also a completed test knit, and this is the Sporty Knit Skort by Handmade by Florence. I'm really excited about this one because it's my first bottoms that I've ever made. Like, I've mostly done tanks and sweaters, so I've never knit for my bottom half before. Now, this is a cute sort of like faux pleated skirt done with like the way that she spaces the increases, and then underneath you have a pair of inset shorts. They are connected at the waistband and kind of knit sort of in 2 parts. So like you knit the skirt first and then you pick up stitches from the waistband and knit the shorts. There's also short row shaping in the back of these, and it helps the back of the skirt be longer and the back of the shorts fit better. And honestly, I am in love with this garment. So I have a little story about the yarn I used for it. This is yarn from the company Boring Knit. So if you know Boring Knit, they have this one pattern called the Boring Biker Pants, I think. And I really liked the color that they had in their sample garments, and they sold kits for it. So I bought a sample box, and when it got here, I had started knitting it when I realized that the size I bought it for was going to be too small for me. So I had to frog that, and now I just had a ton of balls of yarn of this yarn that I didn't really know what I was going to do with or didn't have any plans for. It's a 50% cotton, 50% wool, DK weight yarn, so I think it's 50 grams to 100 meters. And when I got accepted into this test knit, I kind of wanted to stash bust. So the original is knit in Drops Puna, which is an 100% alpaca yarn, but I had so much of this yarn laying around that I was like, let me try and make it in this yarn. And so I really do like the result. I think it looks very clean, whereas I think the original is a little softer, and I definitely would knit another in a softer yarn, either tweed or that alpaca that she used. But for my test knit, I'm really happy with how this came out. I will say, due to the sheer amount of yarn needed for this pattern, it can feel a little heavy to wear this skirt. And I think one thing I would do if I made this again is pick a stronger or higher quality elastic for the waistband, because I feel like I chose kind of a wimpy elastic, just something I had at home in stash, and it keeps everything up like it's fine, but I feel like it would feel better if I had a stronger elastic in the waistband. So in terms of any mods or sizing things I made for the pattern, I don't know what the pattern's gonna look like when it finally releases, but I knit mine a tad shorter for the size 3 or ABC, whatever size C that I knit. It's, I think, a few, like 1 or 2 centimeters shorter. And then for the shorts, I only knit 2.5 centimeters of ribbing at the bottom. And then in terms of the short circumference, I found the initial pattern to have a bit of too wide of a short circumference for me, but I think Florence is working on fixing that for the final pattern release and kind of doing a schematic for people based on how big their legs are, so that should be really helpful. And in terms of just how it was to knit this project, I really enjoyed knitting it, although it did become really tedious, especially knitting on the skirt portion. Because it is a flared skirt, by the time you're knitting the bottom section of the pleats, there's just so many stitches per round that it kind of got tiring. But once you hit the shorts, it's super fast because that's all in stockinette. It's a long project, but ultimately I think it's a super unique pattern, and I think she did a really good job on it. All right, so moving on to my next finished object. This is not a test knit. This is, however, one of 2 finished objects that are sort of carried over from the summer. So my last 2 finished objects are both tank tops that I started in July, but didn't get to finish until this month because I was so bogged down with test knits. They just weren't a priority. So the first one is this. This is the Montpellier top by November Knits, and this is knit in the recommended yarn, which is Sandnes Garn Tykk line in the shade Blue Hortensia, or just Hortensia. And this is a wider, sort of boxy muscle tank-esque sort of silhouette. It's got really nice ribbing along the armholes and then down the sides here. And it's super loose, open, and drapey. I think I have to wear something underneath it, or else I'm afraid that there's going to be too much side boob for me to wear it out. But it was honestly a really quick knit when you get down to it. Like, if I added up the amount of time it actually took on knitting this, it was probably only like 4 or 5 days, but I was very delayed in actually finishing it. It's knit on pretty big needles and the yarn is very thick, so it flies by once you get to the body. And I really like how it turned out. I think it could also be layered for the fall. Like, it's almost like the size that I would want for a slipover, although it's made out of like a plant fiber. So I could see myself wearing like a t-shirt under this, or just layering it like under something else. In San Francisco, it doesn't get too cold all year round. Like, we don't have real seasons, if you ask me, as someone who came from a place where there's actually snow and falling leaves. So honestly, I do think that my knit wardrobe is pretty versatile year round, and even though I do want to knit sweaters for the overall fall vibes in the community, I don't need to stop knitting tank tops either, because they'll always be valuable as a layering piece with the weather that we have here. So that was my 3rd finished object for the month, and my last finished object is also a tank top that was held over from July, although this one took a lot longer to finish because it was on 3mm needles. This is the Typical Tank by Typical Bliss, and I knit mine in the shade Sage from Juniper Moon Farm's Zooey yarn, which is a cotton linen blend. If you look closely, the fabric, or the yarn, is 2 strands plied together, like a thinner yarn and a thicker yarn, and so it kind of creates not like a slub, but like a wavy textured yarn, so you can see in the fabric that some parts pop out a little more and some parts are a little skinnier. But I like the fabric that it made a lot. I think it is really nice for this pattern, and it has the really nice fold over hem on the bottom. I know some people on Ravelry had found that the bottom flared out and they needed to insert an elastic, but I personally didn't need to do that. I decided to size down a needle size when doing the purl bumps before flipping and returning to the original needle size, and I don't know if that's how you solve that problem, but I didn't have the issue with the flaring out. However, one thing that I did change about the pattern is that instead of a folded ribbed neckline and armhole finishing, I decided to do twisted rib. And this is because the pattern is overall knit in 3mm, and she asks that we use 2.5mm needles for the finishings on the arm and neck holes, but I only had a 2.75mm needle, so I attempted to do the ribbed fold over neckband on the neck first, and I just found that it was way too bulky and clunky, which I think would be fixed if I had a smaller needle size. So instead I ribbed back and decided to just do twisted rib, and honestly I think it looks fine. I just finished by binding off in pattern for the armholes since that doesn't really need to stretch, and then I did a tubular bind off on the neckline. And I think it looks pretty nice. I also knit it a little bit longer. I hate having leftover yarn, so I wanted to knit until I finished the ball, but then it was just getting too long for me to plausibly wear given my torso length and the height of the pants that I usually wear, so I did cut off, but it is a few centimeters longer than the original pattern, and I think my folded over portion is a bit shorter than the original pattern. So that is my last finished object for the last few weeks. Now we can get into the whips. So starting off, I have one whip that I cast on early in September and then knit a lot on at first, or not a lot, but I knit a good amount on at first, and then I haven't touched it since then. And so this is, well, right now it doesn't look like anything. Right now it's just a long, flat piece of knitting, and that's because it's a bottom-up top that's knitted flat because it has buttons going up the top. So this is the Skagen tee by Witre design, and I'm knitting mine in a hand-dyed yarn. This is, I believe it's from BluFiber Company. It's their Cashmerino DK, which contains superwash merino, cashmere, and then maybe a bit of nylon. I'm not remembering exactly right now, but it's a variegated yarn, which I always am so attracted to when I look at hand-dyed yarn when it's hanked up, but then I don't actually usually know what to do with it once I have it. So I thought a really simple tee would complement, or a simple shirt would complement this, and the design of it is basically a little t-shirt that in the middle has buttons to button it up, and it sort of has a v-neck, so that's why it's knitted flat. And it's my first time doing a bottom-up raglan. I've done bottom-up before for tank tops, but I've never had to add sleeves, so that should be a challenge. And I also saw on Ravelry that this pattern is not very clear, especially when it comes to some of the finishing aspects, so maybe not the best choice for my first bottom-up raglan, but everyone else has turned out fine. It's funny because in all of the Ravelry comments they were like, wow, it was really hard to follow this pattern, but I love how it turned out, so I'm gonna knit another. So I'm hoping I can just puzzle my way through it. I think people also found that the back was too broad and the sleeves were too skinny, so I'm gonna have to do a little bit of Frankensteining there to figure out how I want to adjust the pattern so it fits and so that the instructions make sense. But like I said, this has kind of been moved to the back burner for now. I still do want to finish it. I've had this yarn in my stash for a while and it's already caked up. I've been trying to prioritize using my yarns that are caked up because initially when I first got my winder in Swift, I was so excited that I just caked a bunch of my yarn before realizing you're not really supposed to do that. First of all, it's messier to store personally for me, it doesn't look as nice and the yarn tends to go more all over the place. But also if you cake your yarn too long before you're going to use it, it can stretch out the fiber and change sort of the structure of the fiber. So to prevent this, I have double wound both, or all of the hanks that I do have wound right now, so hopefully it's wound a little looser and doesn't stretch, but I'm also trying to prioritize knitting from yarns that I have caked up, and this is one of them. So I do want to finish this sooner rather than later, but I don't know when I'm specifically going to have time for it. It's not a difficult knit as of yet, but we'll see. And I think also because I want to finish up all the yarn for this, I could see myself doing a provisional cast on for the sleeves and then finishing the shirt, and with whatever yarn I have left, seeing if I can knit the sleeves longer, and if it ends up being an acceptable length, then I can use up all the yarn that way. So that's sort of my plan for that garment. The next one that I have is a test knit, and it's also my first time working with unspun yarn, which is kind of exciting for me. So this is the Walpole Pullover V-neck edition by Tamara Makes. And as you can see, I've pretty much finished the sleeves, the finishing on the neck. All I have to do now is knit the body. And this is knit in 1 strand of Istex Platulopi in the shade Spruce, and 1 strand of Knitting for Olive Soft Silk Mohair in the shade Dusty Olive. So this yarn is one that I originally got when I went on my trip to Iceland earlier this year, and I had never seen really unspun yarn before, and I know now that there's like sort of a cult following for some unspun yarns. Like I know Nutiden has a lot of people closely following their work, but at the time I'd never seen anything like it, and it's kind of crazy. In Iceland they are selling yarn in like every store. Like we were in an ice gear store like to pick out, well, I'm stupid, so I didn't bring like real gloves on the trip, and we ended up doing a glacier hike, so I needed gloves, and I got a little like headband ear warmer for myself. But when we were in the icewear store, we also saw that they had yarn, and so I picked up 4 plates of the Istex Platulopi, and I've been waiting for a while to see what project I want to cast on with this. So when Tamara put out the tester call for this, I thought it would be a perfect chance to jump on and finally use my unspun yarn. So when I started swatching, I mean, I think that there is a learning curve for using unspun yarn because it does pull apart so easily, but I was having a really hard time holding 1 strand of this. So I had 1 leftover ball of the Knitting for Olive Soft Silk Mohair in Dusty Olive in my stash from when I knit my vest number 1 by My Favorite Things Knitwear, and that's because I had a whole extra ball because Knitting for Olive accidentally sent me 1 more ball than I ordered. So I hadn't really known what to do with that 1 like orphan ball, but when I tried holding it with this, I found that they were really good color matched together, and it made it really a lot easier for me to control the yarn since I didn't have any experience with it. So I ended up, I mean, I'll talk about it in my acquisitions, but I ended up ordering more of the Soft Silk Mohair in Dusty Olive, and I figured because it's not the primary yarn, it doesn't really matter that the dye lots probably don't match. But yes, this is also knit in Half Fisherman's Rib, although this time I'm using the knit below method, so I am still learning something new. And you can see like from the fabric, the mohair gives it just a little bit of a sheen, and I think it looks really nice together. I want to use, as you can tell maybe as a theme in this video, I want to use as much yarn as possible for this, but this is still, all of this was knit with less than 2 plates. Like I'm still working on the 2nd plate of Platulopi, and that's only half of the yarn that I have. So part of me wants to make it into a sweater dress, but I'm not sure how good that would look. So I think once I knit to the length that's recommended in the pattern, I'll try it on and I'll see if I would want it as a sweater dress, and if that's the case, I'll ask the designer if she's okay with that, and then knit like crazy to the full length and have this dress. And I know a lot of people find Platulopi quite itchy, and compared to like another unspun yarn I'll talk about in a brief second, it is definitely rougher, but again, tough skin. I don't personally have an issue with it, and honestly, if I did wear it as a dress, I'd probably have tights layered on underneath, and I could put a t-shirt on underneath, so hopefully not too bothersome. But I'm really happy with how this is turning out so far. I really like this like back shoulder detail, and I think, I mean, I'm a really big fan of like the cool color tone, so I already had that purple and the blue and the green as parts of my finished objects, and those are 3 of my favorite colors to knit with besides neutrals. So I think this will fit right into my wardrobe. But I think if I knit the dress version, it's gonna be a definite time crunch to finish by the deadline, which is in November. So we'll see what I'm able to get done. Worst comes to worst, I might just finish the sweater length version for the test, and do promo, and then later rip back and extend the length on my own time. So that's my first whip for the past few weeks. My next one is also a test knit. So the funny thing about this is also knit in unspun yarn, and for this I'm using Mancha Lopez from Wool Dreamers, and I ordered it in the shade Gray or Grease from the website I ordered it from, but it turns out there's like multiple shades of gray, so I don't actually know what shade this is, and it looks more brown than gray, so I don't really know anything about that. But this is another unspun yarn, and you can see here it's the way it's plated up, it's 2 strands together, so individually it's fingering weight, but together it's DK weight. And this, it doesn't look like much, but it's going to be part of the Groningen pullover by MJ Ellis, I think, on Instagram. And so this one, I didn't know this when I was signing up for it, but it is all knit flat and then seamed later, which I'm not that crazy about, but I am optimistic about this pattern. So this is meant to be a sleeve, and I really like this subtle ribbing pattern that it has, and I think working with the Platulopi for the other test knit, which started before this one, helped me get a little bit of experience with handling, and I do honestly think that the fact that there's 2 strands together makes this a little easier to work on than a single strand. But yeah, I don't have much to show for this so far. This one has a later deadline, so I haven't spent too much time working on it, but it's going to be like a collared pullover, and I've been obsessed with collars, so I really want to learn how to do one, and I'm interested to see how that goes. So honestly, the only reason I really signed up for, well, not the only reason, I really liked the design, but I signed up for this test knit because I had all of the Platulopi, and I was like, oh, these 2 test knits happen to go out at the same time, I'll just apply to both of them. And I didn't think I'd get into both of them necessarily. I was just like, oh, it's up to the designer. But I did end up getting into both of them, so I needed to order more unspun yarn because I'm using all the unspun yarn from the Platulopi for the other pullover. So I wanted to diversify, so that's why I wanted to try the Mancha Lopez. But we'll see how this goes when I get a little bit further, and when I have to seam everything together. We'll see how that turns out. I do have a sort of similarly colored yarn I can use to do the seaming, because it's not recommended to do the seaming with the unspun yarn because of how fragile and delicate it is. So those are the 2 test knits that I'm currently working on. The last garment I have is one that I'm working on, and I'm really excited for it from a personal standpoint. And if you're anywhere near knitting Instagram, you know about this pattern. This is the Moby sweater by Petite Knit. This has been really hotly anticipated. I know a lot of people have already cast it on, and I was one of those people. The day she released the pattern, I immediately cast on. I didn't gauge swatch for this one, so I'm sorry, but I was too excited, and honestly I think it'll turn out okay. It's just for myself, so I don't really mind. And I'm knitting the extra small because Petite Knit patterns generally have a lot of positive ease, and I wanted the extra small amount of ease, even though I'd normally knit a small for myself. So I already finished the back yoke portion, and I'm currently working on the front yoke portion before I connect. And it's my first time doing cables. I am in love with it. I think it's an Aran weight. I'm knitting this in Knitting for Olive Heavy Merino in the shade Marzipan, held with Knitting for Olive Soft Silk Mohair in the shade Putty, because they ran out of the Marzipan mohair. But it's a close enough match, so it's fine for me. It was recommended in their color match portion of the website. But I really love the faux cables and the real cables. It's my first time doing cables. Because it's knit in what's equivalent to an Aran weight yarn, it's knitting up super quick, and I am just flying through this. I honestly should be focusing on my test knits, but it's just too fun to knit the cables, and I want to connect in the round for the body at least, and then I think the knitting will go by a little faster. Generally, how I approach sweaters is I'm willing to make a sweater cropped, but I want my sleeves to be right. So instead of playing yarn chicken at the end with that, once I connect in the round, I'll start knitting the sleeves and also finish off the collar, as you could see with my Walpole pullover. So this should look almost like a real sweater, a very cropped real sweater, and once I do that, and I'm very excited to be able to even try on the micro sweater that results from it. And I just feel like I wanted to use really nice yarn for this because this is like my only cable vest that I'm going to own, and I want to cherish it and keep it for years to come. So I'm very excited about the way that that's knitting up right now. And I'm trying to slow down a little with it because I think because it's so fun, I'm trying to like, not consciously, but I am like sort of rushing through it because I'm knitting very voraciously on it. But I do want to slow down and enjoy the process a little more. So I'm going to take a step back maybe and work on it more gradually. So that's all of my finished objects for that's all of my works in progress for the month. I also see myself casting on a new project maybe in the next few days because the 9 p.m. tank by Tiff Knit just released, and I already have a yarn that's already been caked that I want to use for it, so I could see myself casting that on in the near future. So that's basically all of my current projects and plans. If you don't like acquisitions, then thanks for sticking around this long, and I'll see you next time. But if you do, this has been quite an acquisition heavy month. I'm just counting everything from September for this one. It's been quite an acquisition heavy month for me, which is not very normal. And in fact, I do want to focus on knitting down stash, so I've kind of put a soft no buy on myself for now, with one exception. But I'll talk about the yarn that came in this month for me. So 2 of the yarns I got this month were from pre-orders from earlier in the summer, so even though they came this month, I didn't technically spend the money on them this month. But they're both from hand dyers, and the first one is, this is Typical Bliss Taro Milk Tea, which is, she brought back her, like, I think it was the Spring Sweets collection for one more restock, and this is in the shade Taro Milk Tea, like I said, and I got the fingering weight yarn for this. A new pattern just dropped very recently from a designer that I like. It's the Luna Tea by CL Knits, and I think this would be a great yarn for that one. So that's kind of what I have my eye on for this, but I don't know when I'm gonna have a chance to cast it on. So there's that. And then the second yarn that I have a pre-order from is from Ching Fiber, and this yarn is a little out of my comfort zone actually, so I haven't really decided what I want to knit with it. But this is Ching Fiber Dashing Fingering, and it's in the shade Walkman, and it was from their Kawaii Alien collection earlier this summer. I don't know what it is about this yarn. Like, part of it, there's like a little bit of purple streaked through it, and then also primarily green, obviously. Maybe I can pair it with like a neutral mohair to tone it down a little bit, but yeah, no plans for this so far. Part of me wants to do something more textured so that the yarn not like fades into the background, but like there's something to, like, it's not just the yarn variegated on its own, because like I said with my Skagen tea earlier, I love how hand-dyed yarn looks hanged up when it's variegated, but I don't know if I'd always wear it. So I think I need to find something to mellow this down a little because it's a little out of my comfort zone. So yeah, no plans for this so far, but I did think it was kind of cool color and kind of unique. So the next few acquisitions were kind of alluded to in my whips and FOs section, and that's because I bought them to make a few of my whips and FOs. So the first one I explicitly mentioned, this is the Knitting for Olive Soft Silk Mohair in the shade Dusty Olive, and I got this to work on my Walpole pullover test knit with the Platulopi. So this was sort of a necessary one for the test knit, so I got the remaining amount of balls of yarn I needed for this to match the yardage I have for the Platulopi, because even if I don't end up using all the yarn for the Platulopi, I don't see myself holding it singly because it is a little hard to work with, so I picked up more of this. And since I was going for Knitting for Olive, which has flat rate international shipping, I was like, well, I might as well buy some other yarn for a project that I wanted. And so, like I mentioned, I knit the Moby sweater in Knitting for Olive as well, and so it's Knitting for Olive Marzipan for the heavy merino and Knitting for Olive Putty for the mohair because they don't have any more in the marzipan. And I think the fabric, it makes this very nice. I think the putty being a little bit lighter kind of lightens up the entire sweater, but in a very subtle way. And I like the soft sheen that it gives as well. And I got enough for a sweater quantity of this. I guesstimated based on the Ingrid sweater because she didn't release yardages for this super early, so I wanted to be able to cast on as soon as possible, so I just got enough for sweater quantity of the Ingrid sweater and crossed my fingers. And I think it's a little short on the heavy merino, but I think I'll probably end up cropping it a little anyway, so it should be fine. The last acquisition I have for this month was also one that's used in one of my current whips. This is Wool Dreamers Manchilopis. Again, I thought it was in the shade Gris, but there's like Gris 1, 2, 3, 4 or whatever, and it doesn't even look gray, so I'm not sure actually what color this is. Even the website I ordered it from didn't specify which gray it was, but like I said, I'm holding this single, well I guess it's 2 strands, but I'm holding this directly from the plate for my Groningen pullover. And of the unspun yarns I've worked with, which is now just Plotolopi and Manchilopis, I do like this one better. It's just softer, it feels nicer, and this brand has kind of been on my radar ever since I saw Ozetta release the Miles shirt jacket, and I've been very curious about it. I think it's a little expensive because I bought it from a secondary retailer in the US, and I think on the website, like directly from the website, it's only like, it's not nearly as much as it is imported already to a small business in the States. But I got 5 plates of this. I don't think I'm gonna need 5 plates, and I think I can return one of them within 60 days, so I think I might do that. But if I have leftover from any of my plates, I might try and knit the Bindle bag by Ozetta, just with whatever I can muster from the scraps. So that is all of my acquisitions for the month. I know it was a lot, but I kind of want to stop buying yarn, at least for the end of the year. I do have one more pre-order from this summer that I'm expecting later this year, but other than that, I really don't plan on buying more yarn. I'm not gonna set like a hard cutoff for myself because I think things change and being adaptable is fine. And I also think for me personally, being too strict and too rigid can lead to like backsliding. But I do want to focus on knitting down stash going forward. And I plan on filming a sort of stash tour video as well, where I talk through what projects I have planned for all of my stash yarn, and I can focus on really loving that yarn and not getting carried away buying new yarn. So that's kind of it for the main meat of the video. I guess in this last bit of time, we can just chat a little, do like a little life update, like maybe a few of my knitting thoughts. But I think one reason why I've been knitting so much in the last 2 months especially is because I actually broke my ankle. It's a little tragic, but I had a bike accident on my way to work one day. It wasn't a car accident or anything, I just fell off the bike, but I broke my ankle, and that was at the beginning of August, and since then a lot of my time has been bedridden or house-ridden. So luckily, if I had to see a silver lining, the fact that knitting is one of my hobbies was very beneficial for this time period because I don't need to stand up or use my legs to do it. I think that's also why sewing's been kind of hard. It's just a lot of moving things around and working the pedal on my machine, which I can do with my left foot, but it's just a little different. There's a few more barriers to working on it. But I've pretty much been knitting non-stop for the last 2 months. It's taken over most of my free time that I used to spend doing other things that I was more active for, but I'm trying to stay positive, and I do love that I've been able to work on this craft a lot more, and overall I am getting better, I'm improving, and I'm staying optimistic about that. I've slowly been able to reintroduce more and more things into my life, and that has been good. But I still do knit a lot, and even when I do go out and do things now, I'll bring my knitting with me very often. Like, we had a beach day, there was one day that was like quite warm. I think it might have been over Labor Day, but a few of my friends and I went down to Ocean Beach, which the beaches in San Francisco are notoriously cold. Like, I would probably never get in the water, but we wrapped my cast in a garbage bag and sealed it off with like KT tape, and I did manage to use my crutches on the sand, even though now they sound like a rain stick because there's sand in there that I just can't get out. But I brought my knitting to the beach. I was working on my Montpellier top for that, and that was super fun. Just getting to spend a day outside in the sun. It just feels really great to go out and to have my knitting while we're all just hanging out. Like everyone, we did a few activities together, but we also brought our own things. Like my roommate brought her Kindle. I also have been bringing my knitting to the movie theaters lately. So one activity that is very safe for me to do is obviously go and watch a movie, because I'm seated the whole time, and especially if I go to a theater with the reclining seats, I can stay fairly elevated. It's a nice experience. But I'm still not great at it, but I learned to knit without looking from going to the movies. I got an AMC Stubs membership recently, so I can see as many movies as I want. And I was working on my typical tank in the movie theaters a lot this month, although I still don't think that's like the perfect project to work on in the dark, because even though it is stockinette in the round, I mentioned how the yarn is sort of like a thinner yarn plied with a thicker yarn, and I did find that when I looked at my work, once the lights went up, I had split the strands in quite a few places, so I had to go back and ladder down and fix that in a few places, but it wasn't too bad. So I feel like I've unlocked a new skill, and I'd like to get more comfortable at that, because normally when I watch shows at home, it's mostly me looking at the knitting and then glancing up at the show. It's been a little hard. This week I've been watching a Chinese drama since my friend was in town, and she likes watching C-dramas. And so we were watching Love Like the Galaxy, and since I'm not like a native speaker of Chinese, I pretty much had to look up to read the captions a lot, so it would be nice if I could knit without looking more comfortably, although the things I was knitting on this week were a little too complicated to really be doing that. But I managed, and I think it's a skill I can improve on in the future. Other than that, I think thinking forward for the rest of the year in knitting, one thing I really want to focus on, in addition to stash busting, which I've already mentioned, is I don't think I should apply for any more test knits. So don't get me wrong, I guess my general thoughts on test knitting are it's a really good way to sort of be part of the community and give back and help out designers, and I like that aspect of it. I like giving the feedback, I like meeting other knitters and kind of being able to contribute to the community, but at the same time, sometimes it has the ability to completely derail other plans I have for projects, and I don't regret any of the test knits I've been in. I've only picked test knits for items that I like, designers I admire, etc. But there are a lot of things that I want to knit that I already have patterns for, and a lot of things in stash, and as you can tell from this month's video, I ended up buying yarn to do test knits, which is kind of not what I want to be doing. So I think in the future I might only apply to test knits if I already have yarn in stash that's suitable for it, and if it's something I really, really, really want to make. Otherwise, I think I'm going to spend the next little bit focusing on myself and the patterns I already own and working down stash. So that's kind of how I feel about test knitting right now, although I won't completely cut myself off from doing anything. And if there's something I really want to knit, then I will take that opportunity to do it. So if you see me doing a test knit after I've already said all this, then I just decided that I wanted to do it, and I think that's fine. But yeah, I think that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about today. If you're still here, thank you so much for hanging out with me for this long. I don't think I'm super natural in front of the camera yet. I think I need to get more comfortable. Honestly, I'm not even super comfortable in front of the camera when I'm taking photos for Instagram, and that's still, like, I don't even have to show my face and you don't have to look at me. But I think getting outside of my comfort zone a little bit is a good thing, and hopefully I can be a little less awkward on camera in the future and things can run a little bit more smoothly. I think it'll be really fun, not necessarily for this video, but in general, I want to learn a little bit about video editing as well, and I want to plan a few more videos that are a little more edited, so sort of like maybe like a vlog or like a knit, like kind of just showing the knitting process more. So we'll see if I can get it together and do that. I also don't really know how often I plan on uploading. I think it'd be fun to do the podcast. I think I'm deciding between every 2 weeks and once a month. I guess in 2 weeks I'll decide how much work I've done and if it's worth showing a podcast for, and if not, then I'll just do another one at the end of October or or early November. So we'll see how that goes. I do work full-time, although I'm able to be remote right now because of my foot. So it is fairly flexible in terms of filming, but I do live with a roommate and I don't really want to film while she's home because I think it can be a bit obnoxious, and then there's just more peripheral sound as well. So we'll see what kind of time I can find for filming as well. Honestly, everything with this channel is a little bit up in the air right now, but I do hope to be back and film more videos in the future. So thanks so much for hanging out with me, and I'll see you next time. Bye!